We begin with some Q&A, just to stimulate the Dhamma a bit. But you can always meditate while you're listening. There's a question here, the first question, which isn't so clear. It says, what type of practice of meditation? Not sure. I assume you're asking about the technique of meditation, perhaps. So this morning I was talking about anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, which is a very ancient meditation technique for developing both calm, serenity of mind, and also insight. So it's considered a very suitable kind of universal meditation object. And the Buddha himself practiced practiced anapanasati, or mindfulness of breathing, on the night of his enlightenment. Prior to that, he'd been cultivating what we call the ascetic practices, which particularly involve giving the physical body a hard time. So practices such as fasting, going without sleep, not lying down, and so on. And he hadn't found success with those practices, although he had done them very well and gained great endurance. So he turned to anapanasati before his enlightenment, and that was based on remembering when he was a young boy, having quite naturally practiced mindfulness of breathing during a ceremony when his father, the king, was doing the ploughing ceremony. A young boy, not that interested in ceremonies, he went off and sat under a tree, rose apple tree, and quite naturally turned to the breath and started meditating without instruction from anyone, as far as we know. That's probably a sign he'd been doing it for many lifetimes, so he had a natural inclination to meditate on the breath. And even in one lifetime, you'll notice if you do a lot of breath meditation, well, there'll be times in your day maybe, or times when you've got not much to do, your mind naturally goes to the breath as a kind of the basis of the mind. You haven't got anything particularly to think about, talk about, do, and then you just can sit there and go to the breath. Say, like when you're sitting as a passenger in a vehicle, or when you're waiting for somebody. So mindfulness of breathing is a very useful meditation technique. I'd recommend everyone to try it at least. And you find a particular point in the body, as I was explaining, either at the tip of the nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen, are the most common ones. And you keep your breath in mind by holding attention on that one point. As body and mind calm down, you start to relax. The aim is to get to the point where you're enjoying it and you feel quite comfortable doing it. Then it will be easier, and it's easier to let go of other distractions if you're enjoying the meditation object. And the different factors of samadhi can arise: tranquility of body and mind, rapture, happiness, and stillness, where the mind isn't distracted or thinking a lot. When the mind becomes more still, it's possible to contemplate or turn to develop insight into the three characteristics of existence: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self, or the conditioned nature of existence, meaning that there's not any being or any lasting entity, permanent entity in our body and mind. These things arise due to causes and conditions, they change and then they pass away. So the contemplation, we often nowadays use the term vipassana, so vipassana meditation, developing insight, wisdom that helps to uproot wrong views, craving, attachment. But calm and insight work together, because as the mind is more calm, mindfulness is more steady, we feel more relaxed, sense of well-being, and then it's much easier to contemplate because your mind is calm and mindfulness is continuous. So that's mindfulness of breathing, in brief. Other meditation techniques could be the same. So it could be what we call mindfulness of the body, kaya kata sati, and that might involve focusing on one or more of the 32 parts of the body, or one or more of the 4 elements, primary elements, earth, air, fire, water, or contemplating the body as a corpse. Or one could develop recollection of death. One could develop mindfulness and direct it to one of the Brahma Vihara meditations, so loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, or equanimity. One could recollect the Buddha, is another one. So there actually, in Buddhism, there are many different meditation techniques to be used. But the main purpose is firstly to calm the mind down and help us get beyond the influence of the 5 hindrances, because they're what disturb our mind and distract us, make us sleepy, make us agitated, worried, and so on. And when the mind becomes more calm and stable and still, and then to develop insight by observing clearly the nature of physical and mental phenomena without the distractions of an agitated mind getting in the way. So in this retreat I'll be talking mainly about anapanasati, but also from these 2 angles. One, learning just to calm the mind. Secondly, to contemplate, to uproot some of our attachments, see through them. And calm and insight work together like 2 sides of the same thing. You only have one mind, but you need to train your mind in to develop different parts of the practice. So sometimes we're focusing more on just calming down, steadying the mind, bringing up mindfulness. Sometimes we're focusing more on contemplation, really trying to understand and see the nature of things more deeply. Dear Ajahn Kalyano, when Sumedha made the aspiration to become a Buddha, the Buddha Dipankara looked into the future and saw that he would become a Buddha in 4 what we would call asankhayas, incalculable eras, in 100,000 kalpas in the future. He would become a Buddha. Can you please explain how rebirth and karma works to generate a succession of lives already set in motion? Thank you. Well, in the case of Sumedha, who is our Buddha, Gautama the Buddha, Prince Siddhartha Gautama, recollected that in a previous life he'd been Sumedha, a hermit, who had been inspired meeting a Buddha, Dipankara the Buddha, to make a resolution, a very strong resolution to become a Buddha himself. And Dipangara, the Buddha, in that life, was there to witness this resolution. And with the great limitless knowledge of a Buddha, he could actually see into the future, say, this is going to happen, this person will become a Buddha. So it's a very rare thing, not an easy thing. Both for an individual to make such a resolution, and then for a Buddha to witness it and know it as something that will become true. Obviously, Sumedha, the hermit, he must already have had great qualities of mind developed to that point, to the point where he could make that solemn resolution and the Buddha says, yeah, it will come true. It'll take a long time, 4 incalculable eras and 100,000 kalpas, eons. Well, that's not a short period of time, that's a huge, massive period of time, many, many lifetimes. But the important thing is the Buddha, in Dipangara, the Buddha could see Sumedha had what it takes. He had the right foundation, the right qualities. He developed his mind to the point where you could say he'd be unstoppable. Nothing would sway him from that aspiration, and no obstacle would be insurmountable for him. He could do it. He could really become a Buddha. So, for us, we probably wouldn't make such 100% prediction on anything because we know everything is subject to change. It's not sure, but then a Buddha is special. Buddha's predictions are based on such a pure, insightful mind. The knowledge, the wisdom of a Buddha is so well developed. Perhaps a Buddha can make such a prediction. And then Sumedha obviously was such a well-developed character that the Buddha could say that. The Buddha wouldn't say that about other people perhaps that he met who may also be inspired. Like you get many practitioners saying, I would like to become a Buddha, I aspire to be a Buddha. But the qualities of mind are not yet mature enough, well-developed enough for anyone to say, yeah, that will definitely happen. Because to become a Buddha is a very long, tiresome path to follow. It involves going through a lot of suffering, helping others, developing oneself, helping others for many, many lifetimes. And they say in the history of many great teachers, enlightened beings, some of them have previously held the aspiration to become a Buddha, but then they gave it up, such as Lumpur Man. In the modern era, he's somebody who we believe, based on his own words, that he had aspired previously to become a Buddha. He never quite reached the point where he was confirmed by a living Buddha as a bodhisattva who would become a Buddha, but he still had that aspiration for many lifetimes. And then he said eventually he gave up the aspiration and aspired to become what we call a Savaka Buddha, meaning a disciple of a Buddha. So our Buddha is Gautama the Buddha, and he's had many disciples, monks and nuns, laymen, laywomen who have become enlightened. And they're all called Savakas. So Lumpur Man became a Savaka, but he said previously he had held the aspiration to become a Buddha. But Sumedha, the hermit, did become a Buddha. He became Gautama the Buddha, we believe. So in terms of karma, the development of a person's practice over many lifetimes, well, one way they define a Buddha is they say the 10 paramis, spiritual perfections, have been developed on 3 levels. The ordinary level, the intermediate level, and then the highest level. They say on 3 levels, or 3 times 10 is 30, so they call it the 30 levels of spiritual perfection are all perfected, meaning over and over again the Buddha, the Bodhisattva to be a Buddha, the person practicing to be a Buddha, has perfected these spiritual perfections in lifetime after lifetime, making the utmost commitment and sacrifice for his practice to become a Buddha. So sometimes we even say keeping precepts, sacrificing a life, practicing compassion, practicing great endurance, sometimes to the point of sacrificing his good health or even his life in some lifetimes. They call it the supreme sacrifice. That's what it takes to become a Buddha. To become an arahant, to reach the end of the path, well, the main difference between an arahant and a Buddha is an arahant hasn't been cultivating the path for so long, and then the knowledge, the qualities of an arahant, the ability to teach, is not as well developed as a Buddha. But the enlightenment experience, the purity of mind, the freedom from craving and attachment is the same. So all enlightened beings, whether it's a Buddha or a Savaka, a disciple of the Buddha, they all reach enlightenment. They all have the same experience of a pure mind. They all have the same insight into the unconditioned quality of Nibbana. So the karma we're making, in terms, you've asked a question about karma, well, the cause for enlightenment, whether it's a Buddha or an Arahant, is this Noble Eightfold Path, perfected, developed, perfected. Without that, the Buddha said a being can't reach enlightenment, can't reach the end of suffering, can't purify their mind from craving and attachment, can't cut off the fetters, remove the fetters that bind us to worldly existence. Only through cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path and perfecting it, developing it to its completion, can one reach enlightenment. So that's the cause. The result is Nibbana. So that's karma, isn't it? We're still working with karma as practitioners of following the Buddha. We're cultivating good karma of the Noble Eightfold Path. And at some point, hopefully, everyone will reach enlightenment, and that will be the result. Of course, there's good and bad karma, and sometimes we make bad karma, sometimes just momentarily through small intentions or mental states we cling on to, sometimes more serious bad karma, unwholesome karma. And this is what our practice is helping us to deal with, to have enough awareness to avoid making bad karma and to cultivate good karma, and cultivate the best karma of the Noble Eightfold Path. So one thing with the bodhisattvas, why do they keep coming back and being born again? Why don't they, say, become enlightened and end the cycle of birth and death? Well, because they have the aspiration to become a Buddha. That keeps them going. That aspiration, that intention is so powerful, even though they may have developed great qualities, sila, samadhi, panya, psychic powers, all kinds of great abilities. Because they haven't relinquished that intention to become a Buddha, that brings them back to be reborn again. For someone who gives up that intention, maybe they see, it's a long pathway towards becoming a Buddha, it's going to be tiring, many lifetimes, and they tire of it, they may relinquish that intention. And so then they probably have enough good qualities to become an Arahant, maybe, such as Luang Por Man. But as long as they keep that intention in mind to become a Buddha, then that's going to keep bringing them back to birth. So you could say it's a very subtle kind of defilement. It's still an attachment, you may say, but it's not a coarse attachment that leads to a lot of suffering, but it is just enough of a mental aspiration to keep the consciousness keep reoccurring, leading on to birth after birth after birth, until all the spiritual perfections, the paramis, are perfected. Ajahn Chah used to point out that, and these labels, these ideals, the Bodhisattva ideal, the Arahant ideal, can become attachments that still blind us and become a cause of suffering in our lives. So he used to say, well, don't practice to be anything. Don't be a Bodhisattva, don't be an Arahant. Because wherever you're practicing with attachment, well, that can be the basis for becoming, for birth, for more suffering. That's a subtle point. Obviously, both things are good. Bodhisattvas are good people, Arahants are good people. But it's more in the process of training your mind. Any attachment, even to a certain ideal, can become a cause of delusion, of suffering. So he used to say, don't be anything, don't try to be anything. And one thing also to note is that bodhisattvas are usually very good at explaining the Four Noble Truths, which when we practice the Four Noble Truths, completely penetrate them, takes us to Nibbana. Even the bodhisattva can often explain the route, the pathway to Nibbana very well, even though they haven't fully realized it themselves. It's just another thing to bear in mind. Next question. Dear Ajahn, there's a lot of joy and serenity felt even as I'm attending this online retreat. I see it's part of the cause of keeping the 8 precepts. One thing that stood up for me is that I'm not reading the news, social media as well as eating very much. I'm happy that a teacher pointed out to me that I have aversion towards suffering and I am avoiding suffering as I don't want to watch the news, etc. I see some truth to that. Watching the news, social media can also be a form of practice, as I can observe impermanence too. It's not by cutting it all off. I'm learning to walk the middle path and not go towards extremes. Seeking your guidance here, Ajahn. Wishing you well. Well, I think you've identified some of the problems of living in the world. Someone earlier today in the monastery was saying, it's so hard to practice the Dhamma when you're living in the world and the world is full of confusion and some people practice Dhamma, many people don't. A lot of views and opinions and different kinds of behaviour you have to encounter every day. So it's certainly challenging, but you need to reflect on this, don't you? Like things like watching the news, you have to know the right amount for you, how much you can cope with, how much your mindfulness and insight can cope with, how much your peace of mind can cope with. Some people have very well-developed wisdom faculties. Their insight is sharp, so they watch some news or hear the news, read the news, and they don't lose sight of their practice. They can let go very easily. They can see the 3 characteristics of impermanence, unsatisfactory, not self, in the things that they encounter in daily life. So whether it's other people through social media, the news, images, information, and so on, they don't lose track of their practice. But some people do, and probably the majority of people have to be careful, because the more we absorb from social media, the news, and other similar things, it overwhelms our senses, doesn't it? And When I say overwhelmed, what I mean is we easily lose our mindfulness, our composure, our restraint, and the mind is conditioned by the things it sees, things we hear. So you have you have to know the right amount. You have to know your limits. So a retreat is a good time where you set some limits. You stop talking about worldly things, politics and the economy and what other people are doing, maybe all the normal things we might fill our minds with. We're cutting a lot of that out when we're on retreat. So I'd recommend, if you can't do that every day, at least do it periodically in your life. Cut out the social media, cut out the news, the entertainment world and all of this, and really get to know yourself. Spend quality time with yourself, developing mindfulness, insight. Then when you go back to the world, maybe you have to go back and interact with your family, friends, interact through work. You have some skills and knowledge to help you deal with that. But you have to know what amount you can cope with. So some people don't need to really see much news at all. Others take a little bit, others can take more. But you have to look at what's going on in your mind, don't you? The result of your actions. So if you spend too much time on social media, or you're spending too much time watching the news, surfing through different social media channels, and it's making you feel less peaceful, you have more mental agitation, more worry and anxiety, more desire and greed is stirred up, then that's a sign you need to change your behavior. Only you can make that decision in the end. We are adults, we're mature people, so you have to choose for yourself how well you look after yourself, how much you interact with the world, and particularly the world of technology, information technology, and so on. What do we know about the internet? Well, majority of internet traffic is to do with pornography. Pornography is clearly coming from a place of lust, attachment. It's clearly unwholesome and won't make your mind peaceful. Simple as that. So if people pursue a lot of pornography in whatever form, mild or more severe, it's not going to make them peaceful, it's not going to lead to insight, it's not going to be part of the path leading to enlightenment. So that's something to think about, isn't it? Cut it out, reduce it, cut it out. Same with, you have to be careful with other things that stir up more extreme emotions. So it could be politics, gossip, just distraction. There's a lot of things that distract us but stir up emotions. This is something for each individual to contemplate, isn't it? Obviously, you can use technology for good purposes, skillful purposes, like doing a Zoom retreat, listening to Dhamma, getting advice, chanting together, and so on. There's a use for technology and for running the world, for sharing information and so on, getting things done. Technology has a role to play, but it also has its danger that comes with it. And that's where we have to observe and consider how to manage that danger, how to manage the risk. So we use precepts in mindfulness and restraint to deal with that. Most people who spend a lot of time on their phones or computers, they say when they do a retreat, they really enjoy getting used to setting aside the technology. And usually by the end of the retreat, they feel quite good, quite refreshed from it. So that's a sign, isn't it, that there can be a benefit from using social media less, looking at stuff online less, listening to less news. So much of the technology, the information you get through technology is just repetitive, not very helpful, and just feeding a lot of memories, but what we call sanya, which then will keep coming up in your mind. Why, when you meditate, does it take ages for your mind to calm down for mindfulness to be established, for samadhi to arise, for insight to arise. Because you're wading through a lot of sanya, a lot of memories, and a lot of that is coming from technology. Thinking about the world, remembering what's happened in the world, forming opinions and views based on that, our preferences, what we like, what we don't like. We've got all kinds of information in our mind, and as you start to meditate, it percolates up, filters up, and you have to work through it, don't you? So it makes it harder to settle down in your meditation. It makes it harder to achieve any kind of peace. But who can we blame? Well, largely we've only got ourselves to blame. So a bit more discipline, more renunciation, more letting go of this stuff will probably help you. Dear Luang Por, please kindly explain the meaning of the third fetter, the attachment to rites and rituals, what we call Sila Pata Paramasa. Well, as you know, the Buddha talked about the 10 fetters, Sangyojana. These kilesas, mental defilements that bind the mind to the world, to the cycle of birth and death, to suffering. Only the Arahant has abandoned all 10. But the first 3 we all have to take an interest in because they're the first 3 that you abandon before anything else. And stream enterer, Sotapanna, has abandoned the first 3. So we all have to aspire to study, learn about these 3 fetters and abandon them. So the first is Sakkaya Ditthi, the view of the 5 khandhas, this body and mind as being a self, or a self within them, or the 5 khandhas within a self, and so on. But just what we call self-view. Always taking the body to be me, mine, myself, a being, a solid entity. Taking our feelings, our memories, our thoughts, our emotions as a solid me, my thoughts, I think, therefore I am. Rather than seeing things as conditioned phenomena that arise and pass away. A feeling arises, passes away. This body is something that arises, passes away every moment of every day. It's changing this body. We see them more in terms of a solid self. So that's Sakkaya Ditthi, the first fetter. Second is Silabbata Paramasa, the third is doubt, Vicikicca. So particularly doubt about what is the path, what is the correct path that leads to the abandoning of all the fetters, leads to enlightenment, and what is not. Uncertainty, doubt about the enlightenment of the Buddha, doubt about one's own ability to become enlightened. All those kind of skeptical doubts that stop us from progressing, stop us from committing to the practice. Silabbata Paramasa, the other of the 3 fetters, is attachment. Sometimes they say attachment to rites and rituals. Sila obviously means precepts, guidelines, precepts, rules of training rules. Pata means observances, again, training rules, observances, certain practices that people take on. Paramasa means grasping them wrongly. So wrong grasping of the training rules and practices that we take on. Ajahn Chah used the term fumbling, groping, fumbling, like when you're in a dark room, you can't see, so you kind of move around trying to feel where everything is because you can't see, there's no light. You fumble, you grope when you can't see. What he meant was attaching to precepts, practices, observances, but without clarity, without insight, without awareness, so that one is not necessarily using them wisely. One's groping or fumbling around at them. And the way you determine how your attitude and how you're relating to precepts that you keep, say, well, you look at the results. So the purpose of precepts, observances, different practices, meditation techniques and so on that we use in the practice is to reduce the effect of greed, anger and delusion, what we call mental defilements, on the mind, to reduce them and ultimately to abandon them. If your grasp of the precepts or various practices and rules or techniques is wrong, instead of reducing the effects of greed, anger and delusion on the mind, it might actually increase. So, for example, the person who was keeping the precepts, 5 precepts, which are very skillful training rules that the Buddha encouraged us to keep, not to undertake, not to kill, not to steal. But because they grasped at them wrongly, they started to look down upon other people who didn't keep the precepts. So a subtle sense of self, conceit, pride was growing in this person. So they're keeping the precepts, which superficially is a good thing and part of the path, but then with the wrong view, the wrong grasping, it was leading them to look down on others. So if you have a strong self-view, conceit, because you keep precepts, if you meet someone else or see someone else who's not keeping the precepts, you might have aversion. So keeping the precepts with wrong view can actually lead you to become more angry. You might call that, the religious fundamentalist who, for example, when I was a student and started practicing Buddhism, I liked to contemplate, develop the thought of kindness, compassion. Part of that meant that I stopped eating meat. I became a vegetarian. But I realized that wasn't something the Buddha insisted upon in the Buddhist path, but it was a personal choice. But I also saw it could become the basis for an attachment or a silapata paramasa. You become a vegetarian and then very easy to start looking down on people who eat meat. And think, oh, these terrible meat eaters, and turning your nose up at them, being angry with them, whatever. I noticed that could happen, so I worked hard not to do that. So I lived with people who mostly ate meat. So that was fine. They can eat meat, I'll eat my vegetarian food. But because I was a vegetarian and very strict on it, there was a group of people who were into what we call animal rights. And they'd go around liberating animals from factories, damaging farms and factories where animals were kept, and making a nuisance of themselves in society. They were always trying to get me to join them. But I saw them as silapata paramasa, they had some good ideas and some good qualities, but they all were going too far, and they were being very aggressive and unkind to meat eaters and people who produce meat. I agreed that the meat industry was very cruel, so I didn't, support that. But I didn't want to go and harm other people because of that, because that's didn't make any sense. If you're trying to liberate animals, be kind to animals, and then you go and harm a human being to do that, and that didn't seem correct to me. And these people, sometimes they would go and even one time they even kidnapped the owner of a factory farm, held him to ransom, which seemed very crazy. So I could see in the case of animal liberation, vegetarianism and so on, it can lead to an extreme view and actually lead to more unwholesome behaviour than wholesome behaviour for some people. That's just one example. Another one might be the attachment to the wrong grasping to a certain meditation technique. So you sometimes hear this, you hear people say, oh, I meditate in this way. Maybe they practice vipassana, I practice vipassana. And you maybe someone else says, oh, I practice recollection of the Buddha. And they say, oh, that's just samatha meditation, which is not, and I can't see anything wrong with that as a way to train your mind and go beyond the 5 hindrances. And many great teachers, enlightened teachers, have practiced recollecting the qualities of the Buddha as their meditation. But someone else might say, well, I practice vipassana, recollection of the Buddha. No, that's just samatha, no good, no good. And they may argue or look down on the one person looks down on another, which is a shame because probably everyone is practicing Buddhism for enlightenment, but then if you're sowing seeds of disharmony or acting out of conceit or wrong views, then you're not attaining what you're looking for. You're looking to reduce your kilesas, but you may actually be increasing greed, anger and delusion in the course of your practice. So in the end, that's what determines Silabbata Paramasa. Are you increasing the defilements or not? And so precepts, techniques, observances, rules of training and so on are to help us to be more mindful, to develop more insight, to let go of mental defilements. They're not there to increase them. And you see some people become so attached to their method or their way of looking at things that they become blind to other things. They become blind to some of their own attachments. They don't see them, and they don't see how they may still be creating suffering for themselves. Somebody who's had a glimpse of Nibbana, a Sotapanna who has abandoned Silabbata Paramasa, they see clearly what is the path all the way to Nibbana. Even though they still have defilement coming up in their mind, they now see the path. And they can see a view is just a view, a belief is just a belief. So even though they still may use views and beliefs and then practices, they're not so attached to them that they're causing suffering, becoming rebirth and so on. They're now using precepts. They actually have used them to the point where the mind quite naturally steers away from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, drinking and so on. They don't even need the precepts perhaps because their mind has developed to the point where gone beyond the precepts, but they would still keep them. They would keep to them, hold to them, just as they like an arahant still follows the Vinaya, or the code of discipline, all the many rules that a Buddhist monk keeps. The arahant still follows them, and the Buddha said that's correct, even though the arahant no longer needs precepts. They've trained the mind, they've freed the mind from greed, anger and delusion. But they still keep the precepts, follow the Vinaya for the benefit of everyone, for the benefit of other monks, for the benefit of future generations. They're doing it to be a good example. Even though themselves, their mind has reached Nibbana, they have no more attachment. So it's a subtle point, isn't it? Silabbata Paramasa. Abandoning Silabbata Paramasa doesn't mean giving up everything, not using precepts, not following the rules, not using techniques of meditation. But it's more the attitude and the view underlying these practices. That's the important thing, recognizing where maybe you're grasping wrongly, attaching too strongly perhaps, attaching without wisdom, without being mindful. last question. Dear Luang Por, how does one practice in order to reach the jhanas? Does it necessarily require years of single-minded meditation practice, whether as a monastic or as a layperson? That depends on the barami of the individual, doesn't it? So some people meditate, and for the first time in their life when they meditate, they enter jhana. So clearly they don't have to ordain to do that or be around in the world for very long. It could even be a child. So you probably heard some of the stories, the life stories of monks in the time of the Buddha and nuns, or in the modern era. So in the modern era, monks and nuns who have, when they were lay people, already attained jhana. Famous one is Mechi Gyal, the Buddhist nun who was a student of Luang Por Man. When she was about 16, if you read her biography, she was about 16. The first time she meditated, she went straight into a deep state of samadhi and sat all night without sleepiness, without pain, bright, peaceful. So she clearly didn't have to ordain to have that experience. It happened quite naturally. However, you might say, well, she clearly has been practicing in previous lives, probably been a nun or a monk in previous lives. And then in this, her last life, her practice of jhana developed very, very quickly. However, the more normal, more general, more common experience of meditators is you don't straight away attain jhana. You might have to practice for many years either as a lay practitioner, do lots of retreats and be very disciplined in your meditation, or become a monastic, ordain, and live a life that's very suitable for developing refined states of samadhi and really dedicate one's efforts to that. That might be the more normal practice. But either way, it just depends on a whole range of qualities, the karma of the person, how much they've done before. Some people seem to get quick results, some people slower. Ajahn Chah used to say, as long as you keep meditating, cultivating mindfulness, learning how to keep precepts, learning to practice renunciation, not filling your mind with all kinds of stuff. As long as you keep doing that, sooner or later your mind will settle down and you'll experience states of calm. How quick, how slow, you don't really need to think about that so much. More just think about how to bring up effort, how to keep that effort going, what are the obstacles, what's filling your mind. If you're not peaceful, why? What's going on? Why am I angry? How can I deal with this anger and abandon it? Why am I full of desire? Why do I have so much desire for this, desire for that? What can I do about it? How can I let go of it, overcome it? Why do I have so much doubt? These 5 hindrances are our 5 teachers. Why am I always falling asleep when I meditate? You've got to investigate that. You've got to find ways through it. How to bring up states of wakefulness. In the end, we have to put a lot of effort into developing basic mindfulness in all postures, standing, walking, sitting, lying down. So in terms of jhana, if you're practicing breath meditation, you practice to the point where when you're falling asleep, you're with the breathing. When you wake up, you carry on following the breathing. That's a sign that you've really probably developed a strong mindfulness with the breathing. If you're reciting Buddha or recollecting the Buddha, you're learning to recite that in many different activities and postures, and you fall asleep reciting Buddha and you wake up reciting Buddha. Maybe even you wake up in your dreams reciting Buddha. It's very much like that. You really need to dedicate, become one-pointed, focused on your meditation object to develop strong states of samadhi. It's not going to happen in a casual way. It will come through practice and dedicated practice. So, that's this afternoon's questions. Maybe we'll take a break now for about 30 minutes of walking meditation. As I was explaining earlier, for the walking meditation session, you can find a space, even the smallest space in your room, or in a corridor of the house, or anywhere around where you live, and try and find a place where you can walk back and forth mindfully, composing yourself, bringing your attention to your body, your feet touching the ground. And practice letting go as you do that. Why can't you stay with the feet touching the ground or the recitation of Buddha? Because your mind starts engaging with the world, following trains of thought, planning things, getting stuck in the past. As you're walking, learn to let go. So let go of all that. Bring your mind back to the present moment. And you may find that if you can keep the composure, the awareness with the walking posture and the feet touching the ground, your mindfulness becomes very strong and continuous. So that when you come back to sit down in half an hour for the next sitting session, it's as if you haven't gone anywhere. Your mindfulness is still strong. You haven't been lost in a lot of scattered thinking. You come back and you carry on sitting as if you haven't gone anywhere. So please feel free just to bow and then go off and practice your walking meditation and for 30 minutes, and then we'll meet back here at the end of that time.